the manila envelope felt heavier than it should. Viktor Petrov's fingers trembled as he retrieved it from behind the loose brick near DuPont Circle, the October cold biting through his leather gloves. Dear viewers, my big goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers on this channel. If you subscribe, I'll keep creating even more fascinating and unique videos about the Cold War between the US and the USSR. And with your support, we'll get closer to that goal. I'm truly grateful to everyone who's helped me along the way. Now, let's move into today's story. Inside the envelope, a single photograph stared back at him. His twin brother Dmitri stood in what Viktor recognized as KGB headquarters, 4th floor, counterintelligence division. The gray walls, the specific filing cabinets, the window overlooking Dzerzhinsky Square. Dmitri wore a colonel's uniform now. His face looked harder than Viktor remembered. Beneath the photograph, 9 words in Russian. Your brother compiles the file against you. Viktor's breath caught. The street sounds of Washington faded into a dull roar. A bus hissed past, spraying gutter water across the sidewalk. He didn't notice. The handwriting belonged to Alexei, another deep cover agent who'd gone dark 3 months ago. This was his final warning before disappearing completely. Viktor turned the photograph over. A date stamp, September 18th, 1962, 4 weeks ago. His brother had been investigating him for at least a month, possibly longer. The implications cascaded through his mind like falling dominoes. Every report Viktor had filed with Moscow Center, every piece of intelligence he'd gathered, every interaction with his American handler, Dmitri would have access to all of it. His twin knew about the CIA recruitment in 1959, knew about the double game Viktor had been playing for 3 years, knew everything. Viktor's hands moved on autopilot, producing a lighter from his coat pocket. The photograph caught fire, curling at the edges. Orange flames consumed Dmitri's face first, then the rest. He dropped the burning paper into a trash can, watched it turn to ash. 10 blocks away, his wife Margaret prepared dinner in their Georgetown townhouse. Their daughter practiced piano scales, the notes drifting through open windows. Their son finished homework at the kitchen table. They lived in a world where Viktor Petrov was a legitimate Russian émigré businessman who imported textiles and loved his family. That world was ending. The Cuban Missile Crisis had begun 5 days ago. Soviet ships approached the American naval blockade. Nuclear war seemed inevitable. And somewhere in Moscow, Viktor's twin brother assembled evidence that would either drag Viktor home for a show trial or simply have him killed on American soil. Viktor walked away from DuPont Circle, hands thrust deep in his pockets. The autumn leaves crunched beneath his feet, dry and brittle as the lies he'd built his life upon. He had, perhaps 2 weeks before, Moscow issued the recall order, perhaps less. The Sokolov twins entered the world together on a frozen January morning in 1932, Leningrad. Their father commanded a tank brigade. Their mother taught mathematics at the Polytechnic Institute. The apartment smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and tobacco smoke. Viktor emerged first. Dmitri followed 3 minutes later. Identical faces, identical futures. Their father raised them on stories of the revolution, the glorious struggle against fascism, the sacred duty to protect the motherland. Every bedtime story ended the same way: loyalty above all else. 1951 brought acceptance into the intelligence academy. Both boys excelled at languages, cryptography, surveillance techniques. Instructors noted their uncanny ability to anticipate each other's thoughts, finish each other's sentences. Perfect candidates for coordinated operations. Viktor learned English, German, and French. Dmitri mastered interrogation psychology and counterintelligence theory. The divergence began in 1955. Viktor received orders for deep cover insertion into the United States. He would become someone else entirely, shed his identity like a snake discarding dead skin. The briefings lasted 6 months. New background, new mannerisms, new memories. Viktor Petrov emerged from that process. A Russian émigré who'd fled the revolution as a child, now returning to build a business in America. Dmitry stayed behind. His path led through the ranks of domestic counterintelligence, hunting traitors within Soviet borders. He married young, a loyal party member who asked no questions. Viktor sailed to New York in March 1956, carrying forged documents and a mission that had no end date. The legend worked perfectly. Viktor established an import business, attended émigré gatherings, expressed carefully calculated nostalgia for old Russia while praising his adopted homeland. He met Margaret at a diplomatic reception in 1957. She worked as a translator at the State Department, spoke decent Russian, wore a blue dress that matched her eyes. Their courtship followed a script Viktor had memorized, but somewhere along the way, the performance became real. They married that December. Snow fell during the ceremony. Margaret's father, a Navy captain, gave a toast about bridging cultures. Viktor smiled and felt something crack inside his chest. Children arrived quickly. Sarah in 1958, Timothy in 1960. Viktor changed diapers, attended PTA meetings, coached Little League baseball. His handlers praised his cover's authenticity. What they didn't know, Viktor had stopped pretending. Letters from Dmitry arrived monthly through official channels, censored and sterile. "Brother, I trust you serve with honor. Moscow is cold this winter. Mother asks about you." Viktor wrote back with equal care. "Business prospers. America has its charms but lacks the soul of our homeland. Give Mother my love." Neither brother mentioned the truth growing between them like frost on glass. Viktor was becoming American. Dmitry was becoming something harder, colder, more dangerous. By 1961, Viktor had built a life he didn't want to lose. Dmitry had built a career on suspecting everyone. The stage was set for betrayal. June 1961 brought unexpected news through Viktor's handler. Dmitry had received promotion to the American desk, counterintelligence division. Pride warmed Viktor's chest for exactly 3 seconds before ice replaced it. His twin brother would now oversee all Soviet intelligence operations in the United States, including Viktor's. August shattered what remained of Viktor's comfort. The Berlin Wall rose overnight, concrete and barbed wire splitting families apart. Viktor's orders intensified immediately. Moscow Center demanded Pentagon contacts, missile specifications, NATO deployment schedules. The requests grew bolder, more reckless. Viktor's handler, a nervous man who sweated through his shirts, pressed harder during each meeting. Margaret mentioned something odd over dinner one September evening. FBI agents had questioned 3 of her State Department colleagues about contacts with Soviet nationals. Routine security reviews, they claimed. The interviews lasted hours. One colleague broke down crying, insisted she'd done nothing wrong. Viktor's fork scraped against his plate, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. He forced his hand steady, asked casual questions, smiled at the right moments. Inside, calculations raced. The FBI was tightening surveillance. Someone had triggered additional scrutiny. October brought the first surveillance team. Viktor spotted them during his morning commute, a blue Chevrolet that appeared 3 times in 4 days. The driver wore sunglasses even when clouds obscured the sun. Amateur work, but deliberate. They wanted him to notice. His dead drop protocols changed without explanation. New locations, new signals, new timing. The handler's instructions arrived encoded differently, using emergency ciphers reserved for compromised networks. Viktor decoded the November message in his office bathroom, the paper trembling in his hands. Heightened caution advised, internal review underway. December's communication carried worse news. Another deep cover agent, Yuri, had been recalled to Moscow for consultation. He never returned. His wife received a telegram 3 weeks later. Accidental drowning during vacation. Viktor knew better. Yuri had been liquidated. The pattern crystallized. Someone in Moscow suspected a mole within the American network. Someone was conducting a methodical investigation, reviewing every agent's performance, analyzing every report for inconsistencies. February 1962 delivered confirmation through an unexpected source. Another double agent, one Viktor barely knew, left a coded warning in a used bookstore. Viktor discovered it tucked inside a Hemingway novel, the message hidden using a cipher from training days. Investigation led by officer with personal connection to American operations. Trust no one. Personal connection. The words burned themselves into Viktor's memory. Dmitri had complete access to Viktor's file. Every mission report, every intelligence assessment, every interaction with handlers over 6 years. His twin would notice patterns Viktor himself hadn't seen. The subtle hesitations. The intelligence that arrived too late to be useful. The Pentagon source who turned out to be CIA counterintelligence. Viktor had been playing both sides since 1959, feeding carefully selected information to American intelligence while maintaining his Soviet cover. He'd thought himself clever, untraceable. He'd forgotten that Dmitri could read him like no one else could. They'd shared a womb, shared a childhood, shared the same face. His brother was hunting him. May 1962 brought Viktor's handler to the edge of collapse. The man's hands shook constantly now. His eyes darted toward shadows. He mentioned a special investigator arriving from Moscow to audit all American operations. No names given, no timeline specified, just nervous silence and the smell of fear. Viktor continued his routine. Business meetings, family dinners, Little League games. He smiled until his face ached. July changed everything. His CIA contact, a methodical man named Patterson, requested an urgent meeting. They sat in a parked car near the Potomac, windows cracked despite the humid heat. Patterson slid a folder across the seat. Inside, photocopied pages from a KGB document obtained through a source Patterson wouldn't name. Viktor's vision blurred at page 47. Subject, Agent Perseus. Cover, Viktor Petrov. Investigating Officer, Special Investigator D. Sokolov. Classification, Priority Internal Review. The report detailed everything, every deviation from protocol over 6 years. Viktor's genuine laughter at Sarah's school play, noted with the observation timestamp. His defense of American jazz music during a casual conversation with another agent, recorded verbatim with location. The enthusiasm in his voice when describing Timothy's first home run, flagged as excessive emotional attachment to capitalist lifestyle. Dmitri had documented Viktor's transformation with surgical precision. The dates formed a timeline of gradual corruption. March 1959. Subject hesitated before transmitting intelligence that would compromise American naval officer. June 1959. Subject expressed concern about collateral damage from planned operation. December 1960. Subject's reports show decreasing ideological commitment. The analysis section cut deeper. Dmitri wrote with clinical detachment about psychological deterioration, about Viktor's dangerous assimilation into American culture, about the fundamental incompatibility between Viktor's mission and his lived reality. The final paragraph appeared on page 53, Dmitri's signature beneath it. Subject demonstrates advanced ideological compromise. Family attachments exceed acceptable parameters for deep cover operations. Recommend immediate extraction and re-education. If subject resists recall, termination authorization requested to prevent intelligence compromise and eliminate defection risk. Viktor's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Patterson retrieved the folder, his face impassive. The pages disappeared back into classified channels, but the words remained burned into Viktor's memory. His brother had condemned him with the same thoroughness their father had taught them. complete the mission, show no weakness, serve the motherland above all else. Dmitri had followed their training perfectly. Viktor drove home in silence. The Georgetown streets blurred past, tourists and locals mixing in the summer heat. He parked in the driveway, sat motionless while the engine ticked as it cooled. Inside, Margaret called his name. Sarah practiced violin, the notes stumbling through a difficult passage. Timothy's laughter echoed from upstairs. Viktor walked to the bathroom, locked the door, gripped the sink until his knuckles whitened. His reflection stared back. The same face Dmitri wore in Moscow. The same eyes, same cheekbones, same mouth. Different souls now. His brother had already decided Viktor's fate. The only question remaining: would Viktor die in Moscow or Washington? August dissolved into sleepless nights. Viktor lay beside Margaret, listening to her breathing, calculating outcomes until dawn light crept through the curtains. Each scenario ended in destruction. Return to Moscow voluntarily, face interrogation in Lubyanka's basement, the windowless rooms where screams absorbed into soundproof walls. Dmitri would observe through one-way glass, taking notes as they broke Viktor's fingers, his ribs, his mind. Margaret and the children would become leverage. The KGB excelled at using families as pressure points. Defect publicly. Hold a press conference, expose the Soviet networks, claim asylum. The CIA would celebrate. But Moscow's retribution followed predictable patterns. Dmitri would pay for Viktor's betrayal with imprisonment or worse. Their mother, now 70 and frail, would lose her pension, perhaps her apartment. The Soviet system punished entire families for individual treachery. Stay and continue the double game. Feed disinformation to both sides, buy time, hope the Cold War ended before the walls closed in. But Dmitri was already compiling evidence. The recall order existed somewhere in Moscow Center, waiting only for final approval signatures. Run. Take Margaret and the children. Disappear into America's vast interior with new identities. Live constantly looking over shoulders, teaching children to lie about their past, never trusting anyone completely. Viktor had the skills and contacts to vanish, but Margaret would never forgive being ripped from her family, her career, her entire world without explanation. September brought new pressure. His handler delivered orders, obtained specifications for Jupiter missiles deployed in Turkey. The intelligence was critical for Soviet strategic planning. Failure would trigger immediate investigation. Success would provide information that could kill millions if war erupted. Viktor wrote 2 letters he could never send. The first, addressed Dmitri in Russian, asking why brotherhood meant less than ideology, whether their shared childhood counted for nothing against abstract political loyalty. The second explained everything to Margaret: his real identity, his double life, the impossible choices. He burned both in the kitchen sink at 3 a.m, watching paper curl into ash while the faucet ran. The Cuban Missile Crisis exploded into public consciousness on October 22nd. Kennedy's television address interrupted regular programming. Soviet ships approached the blockade line. Nuclear war shifted from theoretical possibility to immediate threat. Viktor's orders intensified. Moscow Center demanded hourly updates on American military preparations, naval deployment schedules, any indication of first strike planning. His handler's voice cracked over the emergency phone line. The KGB expected total commitment now, when it mattered most. Patterson wanted the opposite. The CIA needed Viktor to feed false information to Moscow, convince Soviet leadership that American resolve was weakening, buy time for diplomatic solutions. Viktor held contradictory orders from enemies who both claimed him as their asset. Sarah asked during dinner why her father looked so tired. Timothy worried about nuclear war, had nightmares about mushroom clouds. Margaret reached for Viktor's hand across the table, squeezed gently, and asked if everything was all right. Viktor lied. His specialty. October 27th brought the recall order. The envelope contained a single airline ticket to Moscow, departure November 2nd, and instructions to report immediately upon arrival. No explanation, no option to refuse. 5 days remained. 5 days to choose which version of himself would survive and which would die. October 27th, 11:47 p.m. The emergency summons arrived via the handler's panic code. 3 chalk marks on a specific mailbox, meaning immediate danger, no delays. Viktor kissed Sarah's forehead as she slept, her stuffed bear clutched tight. Timothy had kicked off his blankets as usual. Viktor pulled them back over his son's thin shoulders. The hallway smelled like Margaret's lavender soap. He found her reading in bed, glasses perched on her nose. She looked up, smiled. Viktor memorized that smile. Late meeting, business emergency. Margaret's expression shifted slightly. She'd stopped asking questions months ago, had learned to accept his absences. Viktor wondered if some part of her already knew the truth, had chosen comfortable ignorance over devastating certainty. He left a sealed envelope in his desk drawer, addressed to Margaret but containing only their insurance policy information and bank account numbers. Not the confession she deserved, not the apology she would need. The Arlington safe house occupied a nondescript split level behind an overgrown hedge. Lights burned in the basement windows. Viktor parked 2 blocks away, approached on foot through shadows that seemed thicker than normal October darkness. His handler waited inside with 2 other men. Viktor recognized neither face. They wore dark suits, Moscow tailoring, faces carved from granite. "Comrade Petrov," the handler's voice cracked. "Moscow requires your immediate return. Your flight departs in 8 hours. Viktor's hand found the concealed pistol at his back, a small Czech-made weapon the CIA had provided months ago. Insurance, Patterson had called it. "My family remains here as guarantee of your cooperation. They'll join you after your debriefing." Lies. Viktor saw it in their eyes, in the way they positioned themselves to block the exits. Dmitri's report had condemned him already. These men were escorts to his execution, not his return home. The decision crystallized in that basement room with its peeling wallpaper and smell of mildew. Viktor drew the pistol in one smooth motion. The handler's surprise lasted a split second before the bullet caught him in the chest. The 2 other men reached for weapons, but Viktor was already moving, firing twice more, not stopping to confirm kills. He crashed through the basement door, sprinted to his car, engine roaring to life. Tires screamed against asphalt. The safe house exploded behind him, delayed charges the KGB had rigged in case of compromise. Orange flames lit the night sky. Viktor drove straight to Patterson's emergency contact location, a 24-hour diner near Union Station. He walked inside at 12:33 a.m., sat in the corner booth, ordered coffee he wouldn't drink. Patterson arrived 17 minutes later with 3 FBI agents. They escorted Viktor to an unmarked van, no handcuffs, not yet. "I want witness protection, full immunity, new identities for my wife and children." Viktor's voice remained steady despite the adrenaline crash beginning. "But Moscow cannot know I defected willingly. They must believe you captured me." Patterson studied him with cold eyes. "Why?" "My brother compiled the evidence against me. If Moscow learns I chose America, they'll execute him as punishment. Your brother was trying to kill you. He was doing his job." Viktor's hands shook as he surrendered everything. Network names, dead drop locations, coded communications, every Soviet agent operating in North America. 27 names. 27 lives destroyed to save his own. October 28, 6:15 a.m. FBI agents surrounded the Georgetown townhouse. Margaret answered the door in her bathrobe, confusion giving way to terror as strangers filled her living room. Sarah screamed. Timothy tried to run upstairs, but an agent caught him gently, spoke in soothing tones that meant nothing. Viktor sat in a Virginia safe house watching his family's world collapse through a one-way mirror. Patterson had arranged the video feed against protocol, a small mercy that felt like torture. Margaret's face went pale as they explained her husband's true identity. She gripped the kitchen table, knuckles white against the oak surface. Her mouth formed words Viktor couldn't hear through the soundproof glass. The coffee maker beeped, forgotten. Steam rose from the pot. "Who are you?" Her lips shaped the question clearly enough. Viktor's reflection in the mirror showed nothing. A ghost watching ghosts. The FBI rounded up 27 Soviet agents within 48 hours. The official story painted it as brilliant surveillance work, months of careful investigation finally bearing fruit. No mention of Viktor's cooperation. Moscow would believe the Americans had simply gotten lucky, that their networks had grown sloppy. 3 agents died resisting arrest. The rest faced treason charges. Patterson assured Viktor that none would be executed. The CIA wanted them for prisoner exchanges eventually. Small comfort. Viktor had destroyed 24 lives to preserve his own. November brought Margaret to the same safe house. They sat across a table bolted to the floor, fluorescent lights humming overhead. She wouldn't look at him directly. Her hands twisted a tissue into shreds. "Did you ever love us?" The question hung in the antiseptic air. Viktor tried to answer, found his throat closed. The silence stretched until Margaret stood, walked toward the door. An agent appeared to escort her back to the children. She paused at the threshold. "The kids can't know. Not yet. Not ever, if possible." Her voice carried no emotion. Shock, the FBI psychologist had explained. The real grief would come later, last longer. 6 days passed before Margaret spoke to him again. They'd been moved to a temporary facility in rural Virginia, awaiting new identities and permanent relocation. The psychologist insisted they needed time together as a family unit, despite everything fracturing. Margaret sat beside Viktor on a worn couch, maintaining careful distance. The children played outside under FBI supervision, their laughter filtering through closed windows. "They're calling you Richard Cooper now." She stared at the wall. "I'm supposed to be Mary Cooper. The kids keep their first names at least." Viktor, now Richard, reached for her hand. She pulled away. "Don't. You don't get to comfort me. You lied for 7 years. Every morning, every night, every kiss, every promise. All lies." The feelings were real. Margaret laughed, a broken sound. "How would you even know? How would I? We met because your handlers planned it. You married me for your cover, had children to make the disguise more convincing." "No." "I read the reports, Richard. Or Viktor, whoever you are." Her voice cracked. "They showed me everything. Your training included seduction techniques. Your mission parameters specified marriage and children as optimal cover. I was an assignment." She finally looked at him. Her eyes held something worse than hatred. Pity. "The worst part? I still love you. How pathetic is that?" December 1962. The Cooper family materialized in Portland, Oregon, 3,000 miles from everything familiar. Rain hammered against the windows of their modest ranch house, gray sky merging with gray pavement. Richard Cooper worked as an accountant at a lumber company. Mary Cooper took pills for her nerves, started drinking wine at lunch. The children adapted faster than adults. Sarah, now 14, built walls around herself brick by brick. She excelled at school, but brought no friends home, refused to discuss her father, spent hours locked in her room with music turned loud enough to drown out thought. Timothy threw himself into normalcy with desperate energy. Sports teams, science clubs, perfect attendance. He smiled too much, laughed too hard, became the kid everyone liked, but nobody really knew. Richard searched obsessively for news about Dmitri. Soviet newspapers arrived weeks late at the university library. He studied each edition under fluorescent lights, scanning for mentions of KGB personnel changes, counterintelligence operations, anything. 1968 brought confirmation through CIA channels Patterson still maintained. Dmitri had married an engineer named Svetlana. They had a son, Alexei. The photograph showed Dmitri older, harder, standing beside a woman with kind eyes who didn't know she'd married a man whose twin brother had destroyed 27 lives. Richard wrote letters he never sent. Dozens of them, hundreds eventually, filling notebooks he kept hidden in the garage, explanations that explained nothing, apologies that couldn't undo the betrayal, questions about whether Dmitri ever thought about their childhood, whether he blamed himself for not seeing Viktor's ideological drift sooner. Mary found the notebooks in 1971. She stood in the doorway holding 3 years of unsent confessions, rain dripping from her coat. Her face held nothing, not anger, not hurt, just exhaustion. "You don't get to miss the people who made you lie to me." She burned the notebooks in the fireplace while Richard watched. Pages curled and blackened, Dmitri's name disappearing into smoke and ash. 1974 shattered what remained of their fragile peace. Sarah, now 16, demanded the truth. She'd pieced together fragments over the years. The FBI visits that never quite stopped, the way her parents flinched at Russian accents, the photos missing from their past. Richard told her everything in their kitchen at 2 a.m, the training, the mission, the double life, the brother who'd condemned him, the choice that saved them all but destroyed everything else. Sarah didn't cry. She stood, walked to her room, didn't speak to him for 8 months. Dmitri's career flourished in the reports Richard obtained through Patterson's network, colonel in 1971, medals for counterintelligence work, commendations for rooting out Western spies. Dmitri had become exactly what their father wanted, a perfect Soviet officer, loyal unto death. Richard worked at his accounting firm, came home to a wife who slept in the guest room, raised children who called him dad but looked through him like glass. The FBI checked quarterly, confirmed the Coopers maintained their cover, noted the family's gradual disintegration with clinical detachment in their reports. 1978 brought photographs from Moscow. Patterson delivered them without comment. Dmitri at a party function, gray streaking his temples. Their mother's funeral. Dmitri standing alone at the graveside. Alexei's school graduation. Dmitri in full uniform, pride evident despite the grainy image quality. Richard studied his brother's face in each photo, searching for signs of regret, guilt, anything human beneath the ideological certainty. He found nothing he could recognize. They'd worn the same face once. Now they were strangers, separated by choices neither could undo. 1985. Gorbachev's glasnost cracked open doors, sealed for decades. Richard watched the news obsessively, saw Soviet citizens speaking truths that would have meant imprisonment years earlier. He considered attempting contact with Dmitri through former intelligence channels. Mary forbade it absolutely. They argued in whispers, so Timothy, home from college for the summer, wouldn't hear. She'd stopped drinking, but the damage remained. Her hands shook. Her sleep came in fractured pieces, and she couldn't bear the thought of Russia intruding again into their carefully constructed normalcy. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. Richard wept watching the footage, unable to explain to Mary why the sight of Germans dancing on concrete rubble tore something open inside him. Dmitri would have watched the same images in Moscow, seen the Soviet Empire crumbling, felt his entire life's work becoming obsolete. December 1991 brought the Soviet Union's final collapse. Richard sat alone in his study, brandy untouched, staring at the television as the red flag lowered over the Kremlin for the last time. Patterson called within hours, provided Dmitri's status. Retired with full honors, living in a Moscow apartment, pension secure despite the chaos. Richard wrote one letter, a single page, carefully composed, explaining nothing but asking everything. He sent it through Patterson's contacts, former CIA officers who now worked legitimate business in the new Russia. No response came. 1997 shifted something fundamental. Sarah, now 49, appeared at their door with her husband and 2 children. She'd married a teacher, built a stable life, and spent 15 years processing her anger through therapy. The grandchildren knew nothing of their grandfather's past. Sarah had decided some secrets should die with their keepers. But she'd also decided forgiveness didn't require forgetting, that her children deserved to know their grandfather even if she couldn't fully trust him. She'd named her son Viktor. The gesture broke Richard completely. He held his grandson, this child carrying the name he'd abandoned, and finally allowed himself to cry. Mary had softened with age. She no longer slept in separate rooms, though certain walls would never fully come down. They'd built something resembling peace from the rubble of their marriage. Not love exactly, but companionship forged in shared survival. 2003 destroyed that fragile equilibrium. A package arrived from Moscow, forwarded through channels Richard had forgotten still existed. Inside, a single photograph showed Dmitri holding a piece of paper. The letter Richard had burned in 1962, the confession he'd written to his brother and destroyed before defecting. Dmitri had somehow retrieved it. Perhaps from ashes, perhaps from memory. Perhaps he'd known what Viktor would write before Viktor wrote it. The back of the photograph carried Dmitri's handwriting, shakier now with age. "I had my orders. You made your choice. We both served our truths. Perhaps that is the only thing that matters now. I hope you found happiness, brother. I never did." The postmark was 3 months old. Patterson's follow-up call came hours later. Dmitri Sokolov had died in January. Massive heart attack, alone in his apartment. Alexei had found him 2 days later. Richard wept for 3 days. Mary held him despite everything, rocked him like a child while he mourned the brother who'd tried to kill him, the twin who'd understood him better than anyone, the man whose loyalty to ideology had destroyed them both. 2008 brought Richard's own death, cancer, aggressive and merciless. Sarah and Timothy surrounded his bed. Mary held his hand. The grandchildren waited outside. His final words emerged as a whisper. "Tell him I understand." Nobody asked who he meant. They all knew. The CIA declassified portions of Operation Twin Shadow in 2015, 43 years after the Arlington safe house burned. The files revealed only fragments: Agent Perseus's successful extraction, the compromise of Soviet networks in 1962, the intelligence value of his defection during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Neither brother's true identity appeared in public records. Viktor Sokolov and Dmitri Sokolov remained ghosts, their names redacted behind black bars that protected no one anymore. The 27 agents Viktor betrayed received mention only as statistics. 3 executed by Soviet authorities for unrelated charges, scapegoats for the network's collapse. 16 exchanged in prisoner swaps over the following decade. 8 died in American prisons. The files noted these facts with bureaucratic detachment, numbers in a Cold War accounting that balanced espionage losses against strategic gains. Dmitri's investigation report never surfaced in declassified materials. The KGB's internal documents remained sealed in Russian archives, accessible only to historians with proper credentials and political connections. His conclusion about Viktor's ideological compromise, his recommendation for termination, his choice between brotherhood and duty, all of it stayed buried. The twins had answered the same question differently. When loyalty demanded betrayal, Viktor chose humanity over ideology. Dmitri chose ideology over humanity. Neither man found peace in his decision. Viktor built a life on lies that became half-truths that eventually approached something like authenticity. He loved a wife he'd been ordered to seduce, raised children conceived as cover elements, found meaning in a mission that had transformed into reality somewhere along the way. But every moment of happiness carried the weight of his brother's condemnation, the knowledge that Dmitri had been right. Viktor had betrayed everything they'd been taught to value. Dmitri served with honor in a system that collapsed around him. He followed orders, maintained discipline, rooted out traitors with the same thoroughness he'd applied to his own brother. His medals meant nothing after 1991. His pension barely covered expenses in the new Russia. His son emigrated to Germany, sought distance from a father whose certainties had proven hollow. Dmitri died alone, surrounded by commendations from a country that no longer existed. Two identical faces, split by an ideological divide that demanded absolute commitment. Both men believed their choices were correct. Both paid prices that made righteousness irrelevant. The Cold War reduced complex humans to simple categories: loyal or traitor, capitalist or communist, us or them. The Sokolov twins existed in the spaces between those categories, where morality became murky and choices carried consequences no ideology could justify. What remained decades later? A classified file in Langley, Virginia, sealed documents in Moscow, Mary Cooper's fading memories of a husband she'd loved and hated and never fully understood. Sarah's determination that her children would never carry the burden of secrets that destroyed families. Timothy's military service, perhaps seeking the clarity his father never found. And somewhere in German archives, a letter from Alexei Sokolov to his American cousin Viktor, written after both fathers had died. The cousins had never met. They shared the same bloodline, the same legacy of betrayal, the same questions about whether their fathers had been heroes or villains or simply men caught in circumstances that allowed no good choices. The letter asked what neither twin could answer. When ideologies demand we destroy the ones we love, does choosing either path make us righteous or simply broken? The question lingered like radiation, invisible, persistent, deadly to certainty.